Hey everyone, today I'm joined by three members of law enforcement. The first one is retired police officer Vic Ferrari. The second one is retired ATF agent named Ignacio Esteban. The third one is a retired intelligence detective by the name of Gary Jenkins. Today we're going to be talking about the things they went through on a daily basis while working for different law enforcement departments. Also, we're going to be talking about their encounters with the mafia and other organized criminal groups. We're also going to be talking about the good and bad that goes into each department, such as corrupt cops and, on the other side of the coin, the very respectful cops. Please subscribe to my channel if you want to get more interviews like this, and without further ado, let's get into this segment. Hey guys, how you guys doing?
Hey, Adrian.
Great, Adrian.
Thank you guys for coming on. This is going to be a hell of a show, man. I felt
Absolutely.
I felt it was only right. I've been seeing all you guys doing all these shows and stuff, and I've interviewed you guys each, separately, and you guys got a lot of, I suppose, in common as well. So I think it'd be interesting to get your guys' 2 cents on the law enforcement perspective on things, and the ins and outs that go into the daily work as an officer, ATF agent, and so. The first question I'll ask you guys is, how long were you working in law enforcement and what departments? Gary, you can go ahead first.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for putting this together, Adrian. Kind of interesting show. The cops versus the mobsters. Sammy the Bull's got his, and Cheesy's got his. Hey, we'll take you on. We got the biggest gang in the world too. I used to tell guys.
You guys got a story too.
So anyhow. I went on the Kansas City Police Department in 1971. They hired 350 more guys. It said the big bond thing after the riots of '68. They really were pushing for law enforcement to amp up, so I went on, worked patrol a couple, 3 years, and then I was a station detective for a couple, 3 years, and then I got my chance. A good friend of mine got in the intelligence unit. It's a guy I grew up with, and he had a connection. See, the intelligence unit in the Kansas City Police Department, they like to know not only you and your record on the PD, but they like to know a little bit about your history, your family. And so my friend got on because he had a guy in there that knew his family, and then he knew mine, and because we'd grown up together. So he had an opening and got me in. And for the next 13 years, I worked the mob in Kansas City, and I got lucky because that was right when they started. We had a mob war, and then they started the skimming investigation out of Las Vegas. But a lot of the wiretaps centered in Kansas City, and the audio with the microphones and all that. And so I helped with that for the next several years. And after that was over, then we got a new commander, and he wanted to change things up. And I worked things like the Ku Klux Klan and other groups that advocate civil disorder. And so I worked that for a while, and then I got promoted and went back out to patrol for a while, of course, on dog watch, midnight to 8 in the morning. That was a killer, boy. Then I got in the TAC unit, had a SWAT team for a couple of years, went into the fraud unit as a sergeant, and then got my chance to go back to the intelligence unit, because intelligence is what I always liked to do. That was a lot of guys didn't like it because it takes too much patience and too much imagination, and there's just not a lot of action, but there's a lot of watching and putting things together and developing informants and making sense out of things that most people don't understand. I always like that. And so I did a couple of years there, and then got a commander that decided he wanted his buddy in that primo job of being a sergeant in the intelligence unit. And I'm back in patrol. I ended up the last couple of years as in neighborhood policing, shall we say. So I go all across the board. That was my career. And, I started doing that. I did a couple of documentary films. I went to law school and started practicing law, and I had a lot of extra time on my hands because I just worked for myself and building a practice, and I never really had my whole heart into that. I didn't like it particularly, but it's best part-time, the highest paying part-time job I ever had, I like to say. And I started making these documentary movies just, for fun. And then I decided I'd make the story behind the movie Casino, because a lot of us that worked the skim got together periodically. We still do. Matter of fact, I got a call from the case agent on it, and I got to call him back when I get done. And so I wanted to make that film about the real story behind the movie Casino, because it all started in Kansas City. And so we made a documentary, flew a cameraman, and my son was our grip, our best boy, as I called him, out to Las Vegas. And we filmed a bunch of guys in Las Vegas and put that together. And I was really hooked by then. I got some kind of kudos for that film and that documentary. And so then I did another one about a mob war we had during that time. And I wrote a companion book about the skimming trials. And the skim from Las Vegas from the Kansas City perspective and what we learned here. And so then I started a podcast in 2016 and I'm sitting here. So that's my life in a nutshell.
Yeah. No, you definitely put in your work and your years, you know what I mean? And I think with what you went through with the intelligence and really figuring out that you liked that and you enjoyed that, you had the patience for it, and building relationships with informants. I mean, it was only right to do what you did, you know, in the future with you doing interviews with all the guys. And like I always tell you, you're the OG that started doing all the interviews with the ex-mob guys and stuff like that. But, you know,
that's true that.
you're the first one, man. But no, I think because you made the documentary and I don't know, I think it was all well fit, you know, from what you went through in your career and what you enjoyed. But yeah. What about you, Vic?
I'm a 20-year retired. Well, I'm retired now, but I did 20 years with the New York City Police Department. Bronx kid, born and raised, always wanted to become a police officer and later a detective. Got hired in 87, worked in a lot of different units. I spent 15 out of my 20 years in plainclothes, precinct level, like anti-crime. You drive around in an unmarked car and you're looking for robberies in progress, pickpockets, burglars, etc. I worked in the Manhattan North Narcotics Division for a while, doing buy and bust and search warrants. And my last 10 years, I was a detective in the NYPD's Auto Crime Division. And in New York in the 90s, we were averaging over 150,000 stolen vehicles a year. So it was like shooting fish in a barrel. But our mission was to go after the guys that were facilitating this. So we went after the junkyards, the chop shops, the salvage yards. And a lot of these places were owned by the 5 families of organized crime that ran New York City at the time. I don't know if they still do, but so I had a great career, a lot of cases with cars being shipped out of the country. I worked on an international car theft ring that was shipping 30 stolen vehicles a month to China. Retired 2007. I've had a great second career. I've written a series of behind the scenes books about the New York City Police Department.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like you had your not, you know, in encounters with the mafia, but they were, you know, running the crimes and stuff that you were, you know, defending against and trying to, you know, bust. So, I mean, just the same thing with Gary. I mean, you guys both were involved with that. So, no, I mean, you put in your numbers of years as well. And now you're retired. You got your books, just like Gary got his book and Ignacio's got his 65.
and counting. And counting.
So what about you, Ignacio? What was your department?
I'll let you. I know you guys heard my story before, but I'll give it a little bit of a smaller nutshell here for the audience. Recently retired ATF, 26 years of federal law enforcement. The book I wrote was ATF Undercover, but I thought about calling it The Accidental Agent because I was, at the time in the 90s, I had studied, like I said, political science and history, and I was going to end up probably going to law school. That's what I was studying my master's in international relations at FIU because I have a strong background for that. I always excelled in that. And I always thought about law. I mean, you look at Miami Vice, right? And you enjoyed it and said, man, that's something cool with law enforcement. And I was a very good athlete. I was also an athlete in college, had a scholarship, played tennis, played #1 for my university at St. Louis University up in Tampa. So good in sports. My father taught me to shoot early in life. So I was a good shooter, very athletic guy. So law enforcement was something out of the realm, especially when I saw the openings in Miami in the 90s, where they were looking to hire people who were bilingual, who understood the culture, because 90% of the flights coming into MIA, Miami International Airport, came from Latin America. And they wanted the officials to be able to interact and talk to people instead of bringing a translator. So there was a big push to bring a lot of Spanish people. And I grew up in Miami, and I grew up with all these cultures. I mean, I grew up with people from all over, South America, Mexico, the Caribbean, what have you. My family's, I think I told you before, Spanish Cuban. I'm from Spain to Cuba. And because of Fidel Castro and the communists, they came to South Florida. Great country, let's say. And I was born in Los Angeles, and I was raised in Miami. So this is part of my DNA. So I said, yeah, this works. And based on my background, I passed the test. and I was hired. So I saving money from getting loans from going to law school, and I have to go to a very cold area in Lansing, Michigan, which I was going to end up going. I stayed in South Florida, and I got to start making money and I get into more debt. So that worked out good for me. After about a year, you cut your teeth into passenger processing, working in the line. And then I moved up within a year to the elite team. They had a contraband enforcement team, the SET team. And at the time, the SET team will make some of the biggest, this is mid-90s, will make some of the biggest seizures in the country. I told you, because at the time, the Medellin Cali cartels were still king. It wasn't that they would collapse like we do with Escobar and them, and they were still bringing the drugs to the airports and, come through the Caribbean and to the airport, because the corruption was enormous. It was absolutely enormous we had. And I talked a little bit about my books there, not just within the ramp workers, not just within the longshoremen, but also enforcement officials also. I mean, we had one point where we had my supervisor, this is just a month on the job, maybe 2 months, and he was supervisor. He was taken down in a major ring by the agents for protecting loads that come into small airports, having Hollywood and Hollywood Beach Police Department escort the loads going through the airport that he was clearing. And he was the chief up for the airport. So you have that kind of situation. I'm thinking, man, I went from working from here. Now I'm in the front line war on drugs, and this is what I'm looking at. So that, I'm in my early 20s. So that catches your attention. I network a lot with people because at the airport, we're making seizure all the time. It's not uncommon to seize, like I said, 850 pounds of cocaine coming in from fish from Guayaquil. That was a brick of ice, an extra brick of cocaine, and we're seizing those things. So I networked a lot. But unfortunately, customs at the time wouldn't want their agents, their inspectors, to become agents. Even though we're making arrests, we have firearms, we have everything else, they didn't want to lose the manpower. So I said, okay, well, if that's the case, we have to put in, because we want to be investigators and take a different level. So I put in between DEA, FBI, ATF, Secret Service, and ATF was the fastest because they need to hire people. And I got picked up in 2000, and I was fortunate enough, I was sent to the Southwest border. I wasn't sent, some obscure, big city I didn't want to go to. I stayed in Florida, and I started in Tampa, and that's where I started my career. And I was fortunate enough, I got in a good group where a lot of guys did undercover, and because that's something you can't just throw yourself into. And I worked with guys who knew how to do undercover work. I studied them. I spoke Spanish. That helped me a lot. It helped with my cases, because then I started doing a lot of gang cases, repeat violent offenders, international firearms trafficking, armed drug dealers, murder for hire cases. All those kind of cases started working. And I worked in Miami 12 years. Then I transferred to Tampa, then Miami, and I continued working those kind of cases. And then I promoted to headquarters in 2019. It was time for a change. I wanted to go up there and do something else, behind the scenes. I became very close with the number one in command in the region, for the central region, who later became number 2 in command overall for ATF. So I get to see behind the scenes what happened with ATF. And I think it really incorporates nicely in my book. It's pretty much the good, the bad, and the ugly of ATF, my life story, and I give solutions also for problems we have with dealing with firearms trafficking, violent crime, and things I see we can improve on based on my experience of what we're not getting quite right and what we should be doing as a country. And Gary and I also had a great show dealing with mass shootings, talking about what happened in Uvalde, Texas, Robb Elementary, and things we have to learn so we don't keep on having this cycle because it's not going to stop unless we do different things. And I talk about that in my book, and hopefully we can have a little discussion about that too, Adrian.
Yeah, there was recently just 2 in the news that I seen, another school shooting. No, so that does happen a lot. Yeah. Did any of you guys ever have to deal with any of that, or in your towns or anything like that, school shootings or anything like that?
I did. Yeah.
You did?
Yeah, I did. And unfortunately, it was a big black guy. It was Parkland at the high school. And we kind of responded afterwards. And what was a scandal was that you had this shooter, Cruz, Nicholas Cruz, in there with a rifle, and the sheriff's office, the resource officer from Broward County Sheriff's Office, was outside. He called it in, but he wouldn't go inside. And that was horrific because you had the teachers, a football coach, jumping in front of the shooter, trying to take the rifle away from them. They're getting killed. Students are being killed, and people are staying outside for perimeter. And that was a big problem there, a big scandal. Unfortunately, he got life and he got the death penalty. Many people thought he should have been sent to the death penalty. I know that the governor, DeSantis, wasn't very happy with that either. So, and my experience when we went out there, and unfortunately, and this is my book too, and I've talked about this, sometimes you get people battling, and ATF and FBI have had a history of issues, unfortunately. And this is one of many. And they kind of weren't happy that we were there. unfortunately, but it is firearm. We had the original 4473. Nicholas Cruz went to a FFL. He had purchased a gun. We had that. That's ours because it's an ATF. We're the ones who inspect these gun dealers. So it makes sense for us to have that. And they weren't happy with that. And they didn't like us at the scene. And they made a false allegation. They were contaminating the scene. And they demanded that ATF be thrown out of the scene. This is at the high school. We're here helping. And they demanded, and it was a nasty blowout between the Sacks and everything else. And I mentioned Forcelli because he was out there too and stuff, but that didn't go well. So that's my experiences. And of course, I did a deep dive when I wrote my book about the worst mass shootings in U.S. history, what we learned from them. And, Uvalde, Texas was obviously the biggest black eye, 10 times worse than what happened in Parkland. What happened there, 77 minutes staying outside while the teachers and students are being executed. While it takes the BORTAC, my old agency, CBP, to come there miles away to finally respond to the scene because they're not doing anything, and finally say, you can't just stay out there while this guy's inside and his kids are bleeding out, right? Yeah. Teachers are dead. Kids are bleeding out. And they finally, after 77 minutes, went inside and took care of them, So
yeah, I remember hearing about that.
Those are lessons we have to learn. I know my active shooter training, if you got one or two guys in there and the guy's shooting already inside, you have to go inside. Even if it might not be a fair fight, he may have a rifle and you guys handguns, but they had shotguns. And you look at the video, and what's heartbreaking is seeing the parents who want to go inside, hearing the classroom, their kids are getting killed and being shot, and they're being tased, and they're being handcuffed, and they're being sprayed because they want to go inside while the perimeter's holding them off. And if you haven't seen that video, that's horrible. And then, of course, you hear the stuff later where one officer, she was fired, saying, hey, wasn't your child inside there? She said, no, mine was VPK, but if my kid was in there, I would have gone in there. Not realizing that someone else's button cam recorder was on recording her statement. So those are the horrific things seen and heard from Uvalde, Texas. So, there's a lot of lessons we can learn. And I think one of the lessons I think we talked about, Gary, is like we talked after 9/11, having the pilots armed, maybe also having the teachers being prepared, or shooters having it there, because if you have to wait for law enforcement, wait.
No, I think you cut out a little bit. Oh, there you are. No, but now that you talk about that, I think a good segue would be talking about a close call that you guys may have almost lost your life or almost got badly beaten or stuff like that. We could start with Gary. I mean, did you ever have anything like that?
I don't know. I don't really remember any. I had kind of a boring career, I guess.
Doing intelligence and stuff. Yeah.
Doing intelligence, you kind of sit in the background and wait. I mean, mob guys caught me a couple, 3 times, but we got rules in that area. Back in patrol, I mean, I had a SWAT team, served high risk search warrants and stuff like that. I guess there's one story where my guys are going down the hallway, and we had the information that these guys were jumpy and they were armed, and they had an informant that just went in, made the last buy, brought it back out, and he said, these guys are jumpy as hell. They're looking out the window all the time, and they're both armed. So we go in the back door, and as sergeants, you're in a line. And so the sergeant is usually the 4th man, the point man, and the big guy is right over the top of the point man, and then another really strong guy to take charge of people if he has to, and then the sergeant, so you can see the back of the line and the front of the line. Then there's a couple of guys behind me. And so we got a little narrow hallway, and they go down and they go into the room, and there's some hot areas behind me. So myself and this other guy, I said, watch that. I'll watch this bathroom. Nobody's been in there. You watch that bedroom there. Nobody's been in there. And I can hear Rob up front going, drop it. And then he goes, pow. And I thought, shit, what? I didn't give those guys any blanks. You see, we always train for doing this with blanks. I'd give them blanks, and so it kind of affects, actually, with wax bullets. And we'd shoot at, sometimes we'd shoot at somebody we'd put in there. They try not to hit them with a wax bullet. They'd always wear goggles, or they'd just shoot at a target that was in there with the wax bullet. So my immediate thought was, I'd give those guys any blanks. What are they doing up there? How'd that shot go off? And I thought, oh, hell, this is real. About that time, Rob says, drop it. And then bam. And then that was the end of it. Then they rush in because he dropped him with that shot, and they rush in. And, I'm still standing there watching that bathroom, and Steve's back there watching that bedroom. So, it's that's probably the closest call I ever had. They never shot back. I think the guy was just like a deer in the headlights. He was pointing the gun, but he just couldn't get it together to drop it or something. And you just can't stand there with a guy with a gun pointed at you and not do something. So that's my story.
What about you, Vic?
I mean, New York in the 80s and 90s, I mean, pre-Giuliani, there were a lot of guns on the street. And, sometimes you go and arrest these guys and they got a handgun and they're not, it's not like TV where you got me or they just run away. And one time in the early 90s, it was Saturday morning, my partner and I pulled this guy over. It was like a taillight or something. And it was like 10 o'clock in the morning. And I'm talking to the guy and he's dressed up like he just came from a club. Like he's been out all night, he's coked up. He's got a silk shirt on. He smells like, too much cologne. He's got a trench coat and he keeps fucking around with the trench coat. And I said, you know what? I says, let me show you the taillight. Why don't you just step out for a second? I'll show you the taillight, right? To get him out of the car. He goes, all right. And he starts getting out of the car. My partner's looking at me and I'm kind of giving my partner like a look, like something's not right with this guy. And he starts getting out. And he does it again, and I see what looks like the butt of a gun. So I reach towards his trench coat, and I clamp onto the gun. He clamps onto my hands, and I'm like, "Oh shit!" So now we're on the side. I think it was an SUV. He and I are bouncing off the car, and I'm screaming for my partner who comes running around the car, and I'm like, "Shoot him!" He goes, "What?" I go, "Shoot him!" I gun, and thank goodness my partner just turned around and gave the guy a crack. Yeah. And the guy kind of went back and the gun popped out and, we locked him up. He had a 9 in his waist. But, I mean, stuff like that used to happen all the time. But it's that your adrenaline kicks in and you see your life pass before. I mean, everything just slows down. It's and I'm sure you guys know this. I mean, when you're in the fight of your life with somebody, it's I can't lose. Like you're not afraid of getting hurt. You're not afraid of getting in trouble. It's that, oh shit, if this guy gets the upper hand, I'm done. I mean, that's happened to me a couple of times in my career. And luckily I was, I came out on top.
Yeah, no, because I mean, with that, you never know. I mean, it's either you or him at that point, and if he's got a gun, he's drugged up, he ain't going to give a shit. I mean, they're going to shoot you and that's it.
Yeah, and I'm lucky my partner didn't shoot the guy because we were so close to each other. I mean, the two of us were wrestling for this gun against the car. I mean, who knows? The guy could have moved. I could have gotten hit. So very lucky.
Yeah. What about you, Ignacio?
Yeah, I mean, you do undercover. There's always a lot of hairy situations, things that get a little ugly. But this one here, I went to a store before I started doing UC when I was kind of a new agent. And that's where sometimes when you're new, you see a lot of these things. And a lot of times ATF, we work a lot with the locals, right? And we get embedded. And I was working with, this is like summer of 2004. It was a violent crime initiative, what we call VSET at the time. And I was embedded with Tampa Police Department Jump Out Unit, which is a pretty cool way you start to get really exposed to police work where you're doing quick and dirty, by bus. And a lot of these guys will run. So you get chase them across, some of the nicer areas of Tampa, jumping a lot of fences, careful with dogs and stuff like that. So for a guy, like I said, also with customs, now you're doing this kind of work. This is pretty cool. Later, it would evolve more to undercover work, but just these kind of cases, they can turn really ugly really fast. One moment you're doing that, so it's been a long day. It's hot summer. This, I think, the last deal of the evening. I'm with one of the detectives. We're in a black Taurus, and this guy is coming in with a F-150, and it was a quick by bus pinch and arrest a guy, but the car didn't get tight enough with the vehicle, so he was able to wiggle out. And he comes out and he starts trying to run over one of the detectives that's there trying to arrest him. And he fires 3 rounds at the car and we hear shots fired, shots fired, shots fired. So he said, oh, shoot. So we come around the corner to see what's going on. And the guy, he's a big guy. He's about like 315 pounds. He's Brazilian. And they're like blubber shots. The guy had a Glock he had a Glock 17. So they're pretty much just blubber shots because you have, rounds that open up. So he's coming at us. And he's coming directly at us, an F-150 and Taurus. And only the detective is able to move slightly this way and hits us right in the side instead of going forward. Because if he would have gone speeding around us, it would have been bad news for us right at us. So he hits us. He has 3 rounds in him. and he is panicking. And all of a sudden, it's a full pursuit. We have Tampa Police Department. We have Temple Terrace Police Department. About 3 or 4 miles, this guy who has 3 rounds, panicking all through the city, is coming down. Eventually comes to a crashing end, and we arrest the guy. But just like that, man, one of these deals where you thought, oh, end of the day, it's going to be quick and easy. Arrest this guy, be done with it. Because we were doing that all summer. And this guy got through and was coming right at us. And that could have been bad news. If he wasn't able to move the car fast enough this way, head on with F-150 and a Taurus, that would have been bad news for us. So things can happen really quickly. A little different than undercover work, but in the street, things are really bad. So I just want to tell that story, how quickly things can go from nice and easy to not so nice.
Well, with those stories being said, I mean, what did that want to make you get more deeply involved with law enforcement? Did it kind of scare you guys away from it? Or, I mean, obviously you guys retired, but
yeah, we made it. Yeah. It keeps you on your edge. It's nothing. Don't take anything for granted. Anything easy can become ugly anytime. And you got to understand that it can get really ugly really fast. Like any vehicle stop or anytime you go in a house, don't take anything for granted. Don't expect there's going to be, it's going to be compliant, no problem. That's where you get hurt. And that's where things can get out of control really fast on you. Because you have to go from that white mentality to dark real quick. And if you're in the middle, it's easier to transition and prepare yourself for something. That's my advice.
What, when you guys were on the street, I mean, you always had to, I assume you always had to be aware of your surroundings, like Ignacio was kind of, hitting towards. So what would you do? I mean, because you didn't always want to have your hand on your gun. I mean, how would you guys, keep, be aware of your surroundings?
If you're trying to be cool, don't keep touching your gun. I had a kid tell me, I know all you undercover cops. I said, how you know? He said, because you're always touching your gun. So I started noticing myself, later that day and the next few days, and like, oh, hell, I do.
What about you?
Make sure it's there.
We did a lot of car stops in auto crime. So if you were going to pull a car over, New York is so densely populated. Yeah. So you didn't want to pull a car over in front of a bus stop or in front of a bodega where there's 60 people hanging out. So we would try to just keep tapping the siren, keep going, try to get them near a vacant lot or not a populated area, because sometimes what'll happen is, something jumps off and you're wrestling and fighting with somebody, try to get them under control, and then people in the street start jumping on you. So you kind of want to distance yourself from the public a lot of times when you're either making an arrest or just conducting a car stop.
Wow. Yeah, you don't really think about cops having to do that, but I guess in bigger cities like that, I mean, it makes sense, because you never know who the hell is going to be around, and especially if it's a crime activity area, you got to be aware of that shit.
Well, if you ever see a cop on foot, especially in New York, their back is always against a building, so no one can come from behind them. So they're against a lamppost or something. They'll have their back against something, so their peripheral vision that no one can come up from behind them.
And I always used to do that too, undercover also. If you're in a restaurant or location, I always like to have my back to the wall, never word to the door will someone come by behind me. And that's just, and I do it still to this day. I tell my wife, whatever, hey, I'm going to sit over here, let's in the corner here in the back. So you never know, because I'm thinking not more about doing bad guys. I'm thinking more about, unfortunately, the society we live in, active shooters, people who are doing crazy stuff. So you're ready to prepare and do stuff. So I'm always the mindset of the exits. That was always uncovered. I've always, where the exits are, what we're going to do, if there's a plan, because unfortunately, just the reality of living in the 21st century America that we're in and what we see.
Yeah. Even today, you feel like you have to have a plan. If you're in any kind of communal thing, I always think, okay, what's my plan here? If this happened, then I always have a plan.
Yeah. And, when Vic, you brought that up with, you guys having to pull away from the public and stuff. I mean, with today's, day and age, everybody's got phones and you're being recorded constantly. So back then, how did you guys?
Thank God they didn't have it back then.
How would you guys deal with the
I retired just in time. I retired. They were just coming out with the flip phones, so they could just take like a still photo. So I got out just in time before that.
Oh God, you see it everywhere now. But I mean, with the pressure of society back then, before you guys retired, was it as? I mean, it probably wasn't as heavy, but did you guys still have to live up to some kind of standard? I'm sure, but Was there any pressure, like how it seems to be for people that are cops today?
But, it's a funny thing. Back then, when I worked in what we call the Midtown area, the ghetto, if you will, and I was like the only white guy around for blocks and blocks, which is a lot of your, what you see today is a white versus black, just call it like it is. And it was different. I mean, I remember you pull into a situation sometimes. I remember a couple, you'd just drive around the corner and there'd be a big fight and there'd be about 25 or 30 people gathered around them. And you got to do something. You get out, you go up. And I remember this one. I go up there and these two guys are fighting. And I'm smart enough not to like go in there and start really doing anything because they're not really hurting each other. They're just scuffling around and they're fighting and they grapple. And so it kind of I got somebody else that was just standing there and he was on one side. I don't remember which. And I said, help me out here, dude. And, I knew the help was coming, but it's going to be a while. So kind of like got him apart. And I said, and this guy's like still wanting to come back at it. And I said, I'll take this one. I said, you take that guy. So this was a pretty good sized guy. And he grabs this kid up like that and the bear hug and just lifts him off the ground and holds him up in the air like that. So I take the other guy and just kind of take your hand and say, come on, dude, settle down. And we're ringed with about, by now, probably 50 people. And they're kind of yelling and they're yelling for sides. So they weren't yelling. They hadn't turned on me, thank God. They were yelling for the different sides. So this kid, and I realized this guy, the big guy's like squeezing him too tight. I said, hey, just relax. Just hold him. Don't hurt him now. Okay. I turned back to my guy. About that time, another assisting cars come screaming in there. And we just, start getting people settled down and talking to them and keeping them apart. And I think we probably what we call HBO, handled by officer, didn't even write a report, just get everybody to go on their way.
Well, if they had cameras back then, if they had the cameras, iPhones back then, you would have been viral.
Oh yeah, they'd have been all over us. It was a different world. And this is even like 96. This had to be like 92 or 93.
Wow. But Rick, it sounded like you were going to say something before Gary.
No, I agree with Gary completely. It's a different world.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely is. So you said you retired at the right time, then before all that came about with the iPhones and all that. But so then what about you, Ignacio?
Yeah, my world's different, obviously, because undercover work, I want everything recorded, right? I want to make sure I have good video, good audio. So I'm always conscious of that. You got to think, obviously, make sure what you're saying is accurate, is correct, and you can't be saying silly things. Doesn't look good. So you always have that mindset because I always want to paint that great picture, even for the prosecutor, because they pick and choose the case they want. It's almost like a movie, and I want the jury to be comfortable when they see the evidence. They see me purchasing. These guys are predisposed. This is what they do. They're involved in drug trafficking, firearms trafficking. They're violent, and I'm buying the evidence to make the case against them. So most of my work, I wanted recorded. So that's what I did. I had the video, I had the audio, I had different ways to record it on me in my vehicle, in the apartment, had an undercover apartment, had it fully wired for sound and video, and the cover team could listen to me, which I did that in Central Florida, out there in Pasco County, and I had quite a bit of that because the better I got, and I also did in Spanish, which helped me a lot too. So, and I can hear my English was broken, and I didn't look like this either. I had long hair, I had a big beard, I had a different look, and depending on the person, I can do different accents. English, broken English. I pretty wanted them to think that I came from Cuba for 10 years, right? Almost a Scarface, but a little different.
Good code.
And that worked for me, and I was very successful. I never lost a case. And I did all of them. Undercover case. Obviously, when you're doing different kind of investigations, when you're trying to solve things and stuff, those are always a little trickier. But when the cases are predisposed, there was no entrapment. I had good informants, and a good informant is gold. A good informant gets you anywhere. Vouch for you, they vouch for you, you're in. There's no questions. That's it. Okay, this is Lou. All right, Lou. Let's start dealing. He says, you're the guy looking for guns. Yeah, all the guns. Now the guns. Like you did the video you did on me on my undercover story, right? Which is excellent. Which was pretty cool. I was over, I think, almost 10,000 views. Yeah. Like I said, the guns don't stay in the area. I'm working for the organizations in Mexico, which is what they do, and the guns are going down south. And by the way, I also buy some drugs in here to make some money on the side doing that also. So they know I'm buying dope and guns. The guns are going to stay. They're happy with that. I'm not going to be their competition. And there's no issues. And all of a sudden, I got really good at it and successful. So yeah, recordings were a plus for me, and I used it for my advantage. Different kind of work. So you see different kind of law enforcement. What kind of work I did. Now, if I was patrol, that's different work. I did do some, like I said, jump outs and all that with them, which would make it interesting. But you got to be conscious, especially if we had a camera. You saw what happened in Memphis with a Scorpion Squad. I still can't understand why they did it for that guy, poor guy, Tyree Nichols, right? But you're being recorded, and you're doing all this crazy stuff. Did you forget that you're being recorded? I never forgot I was recorded, because that's in your back of your head. I'm recording myself. You better act and do things accordingly, or you're going to lose your case. Or you say something stupid. So I just don't know what that was about. And they obviously got fired, and I think they end up maybe looking 30 plus years for murder.
Yeah,
it's horrible situation.
You do bring up another good segue. Yeah. Did you guys ever experience, what is your thoughts on police corruption, and did you guys ever experience it? I know me and Gary, we interview a lot of mafia guys, and they say that they had a lot of cops and not FBI really, but a lot of law enforcement on their payroll. So, we'll start with Gary. Did you ever experience any of that or hear about anything of that while you were working?
Not really, not on any organized basis. There were guys that like to hang out in some of the mob bars, and I remember one time ATF was they used to go into bars and just check the whiskey and the liquor and see if lots of times they would take the real cheap stuff and pour it into the top shelf stuff, and so they could check for that and check their licensing and all that. So this downtown footbeat officer, he liked all these guys. Well, I'd worked that job myself when I was brand new. And those guys, when you go in, they want to give you the world, of course. Mm-hmm. Hey, hey, have a drink. Hey, it's morning. Have some orange juice, officer. If there was a girl working there, she'd be just all over you, just flirting like hell. And so I knew how they were. And so this guy, he liked that. And he was like the regular footbeat officer. I never did it regular. I just filled in. And so he goes along to all the bars and say, hey, ATF's coming. There's a strip of bars and ATF's coming. They're working all the places. So the ATF had an agent in one of those bars just sitting there drinking. And so we had little minor bits of corruption like that. They'd buy something from somebody that fell off a truck, for example, and that, that kind of thing. But not the organized kind of, on the pad, as they say in New York, I think, or in Chicago. Hell, I think in Chicago, the mob put people, they had them get on the police department. And same way in New York, actually, those two mafia cops, I think those guys became policemen just to do that. Now, we don't really we caught one kid running license numbers for him. We set him up. We figured what he was doing and got him set up and got him. But and he was a relative of some mafia associate, grew up in what we call Columbus Park area. So, he had those long-term ties, but no organized corruption.
Right. No, I mean, there's still that little bit. I mean, but it still counts as corruption, even if it's little, I guess. What about you, Vic?
I got hired. So in New York in the 70s, they had a big scandal called the Knapp Commission. Yeah. Basically, what they figured out was gambling dens and the mafia was paying off cops and precincts. And they had law. It was like the Salem witch trials. A lot of people went to jail. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people got screwed that weren't involved in it, but because they were there, they went down with the ship. I got hired about 10 years after that. And you had a couple of precincts out in Brooklyn go bad. I think it was the 7-7, where you had so much drugs and money in New York City that what would happen is you get a couple of guys together and they would just start doing home invasions and ripping off the drug dealers. Mm-hmm. And New York City Police Department gets a lot of things wrong, but I'll say this. I mean, they do handle corruption correctly. As far as from the time you're in the police academy, they're bringing in guest speakers, ex-cops that did jail time and threw their lives away. They bring in special prosecutors who are tasked to go after police corruption, give these fire and brimstone stories about what could happen to you. So, I mean, it's not like you don't know the rules going in to become a cop in New York. I mean, every precinct, there's signs all over the place. If you spot police corruption, call this number. But having said that, with a police department with any given time between 30 and 40,000 members, we hire in bulk. We hire anywhere between 250 cops or 2,500 cops in a large police academy class. And they did do a good job as far as with the psychologicals and background checks. But, you're still going to get a couple of bad apples that get through. And, you would hear stuff about guys going bad. Like I remember in the early 90s, there was a cop, I think it was in the South Bronx. They caught him through a wiretap. He had $1 million in his duffel bag. So he would do midnights. He was laundering money for a cartel. They would give him $1 million or a duffel bag, as much money you could fill in a duffel bag. And then in the morning, he would bring it down to a bank somewhere in Manhattan and give it to some financial institution where they would launder it. So, I mean, yeah, I did see things like that happen from time to time. But what really was an eye-opener is when I was working in organized crime. So we did a lot of wiretaps, and every now and then we'd be up on a wiretap and a cop would come, or an NYPD member would come wandering onto the playing field. And, you'd hear somebody on the phone and you're like, that sounds like a cop. Just like the way they're talking, or, yeah, get me this and get me that. And one of the cases we did where the cars were getting shipped to China, we had these two cops that were hanging out with our motorcycle thieves. I don't think that they knew that these guys were also doing hits in their spare time, but they definitely knew they were thieves. And you had a quid pro quo going back and forth where these thieves were stealing things for these cops, like if they blew the motor on their motorcycle or they needed plastic for the bike or something. And what these guys would do is they would run plates for these guys that would enable them to go and steal people's cars and bikes at their houses. So, yeah, I did see it. It wasn't a lot, but it did go on.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's definitely still, I mean, that's just like you said, there's still those bad apples of the bunch that's kind of try and spoil it for everyone else. But no, I mean, for the majority, they're all, stand-up, respectable cops. But, they're still going to be bad in every bunch of anything when it comes to any career, I think. I mean, that's just what it is. But I guess whenever a police turns bad, people obviously are going to freak out really bad. But, what about you, Ignacio?
Yeah, I alluded earlier in the show to the chief when I first started, which is I'll give a little more detail there with customs, which shows the amount of corruption that was. I mean, when you have this kind of money and people see the amount of wealth and how easy it is, you have to have good morals and good values, because if you don't have that and you see that amount of money, you see people go to the dark side quickly, and then it's too late for them. And unfortunately, I still remember I'm a new officer with customs, right? And I remember looking at him, and I still remember how nervous he always looked around. And I said, what's wrong with this guy? He looked shaking. He was nervous. We would know that he had already been arrested, and I guess he was cooperating with the agents. So that's why he looked like he was already, his mind was somebody else. And what he had done, which made a big story. I mean, this was made from around the world. What happened was he's the chief of customs at the airport. And he would go out there and he would clear personally his flight, the flights coming in from South America, right, to a small airport, which is Tamiami Airport, which is not MIA, Miami International, but it's about maybe 3 or 4 miles from the airport. He would clear himself on the weekend, and he would have, this is major corruption, Hollywood Beach Police Department and Hollywood Police Department escorting with him. About 200 or 300 pounds of cocaine comes in. They fucking put it in the cars with the vehicles and their mark units, and off they go to whatever other location they had to do. He would clear it and everything else, but they had the whole thing. I guess they mentioned information, and the agents had the whole section wired up. So they got the evidence, everything they were doing to take him down. But others will go down with that whole corruption. I remember seeing guys, I used to work on the Rover team, where you try to go after the swallowers. Remember, Gary, we talked a little bit about that. And I think also with you guys who swallow a lot of the pellets and stuff like that. And sometimes they would let them go, or they would try to take some of the pellets they passed and everything else. And I was seeing fellow Rovers, they got busted for trying to steal cocaine and everything else. And I see them in shackles, chained up. The guys you used to work with one day, and next day the agent's coming in, and they're escorting to the airport where the comes are, and here they are, off they going to jail. Him with his wife and everybody else, just like, man, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. You know, that's one thing. Tainted Badges was the title of the article, Miami Herald. Tainted Badges. I remember that. And that made an impression on me, for sure. That made a big impression on me. I was in my own 20s to see that kind of corruption. Yeah, I expect that with the ramp workers. I expect that with Longshoremen, but from within the ranks, that was shocking. And with an ATF, Yeah, you had guys, few and far between. You can look that up too, who were ripping off drug dealers. Them themselves would rip off drug dealers. They know working, and they were working with the police department. So narcotics units, unfortunately, you would see a couple of guys get together and you say, hey, so and so has 3 kilos there, and they would try to rip him off too. So yeah, it's unfortunate. Yeah, I did see that my first time experiences, and that what we know of that goes on with agency a lot, and it's unfortunate. Every agency from customs to ATF, FBI, DEA. DA's recent supervisor was arrested. I think he was out of Little Rock, and he was taking bribe payments out of Las Vegas for targets to look the other way. So, you just look it on, and you can see, unfortunately, the level of corruption. When this kind of money that goes on there, that's unfortunately what happens. So people have to have moral compass early, because if you don't have that, and you see what's out there, that's unfortunately what happened. That's why Mexico is so corrupt. And I wrote books about the level of corruption. We don't have a fair partner in the war on drugs because the corruption is so immense out there. The cartels have everything they want. And that's what we talked about, why gun control doesn't work. Mexico is very strict at gun control, but the cartels have everything they want because it comes from here, because they buy everybody. If they can't buy you, they'll kill you. Mm-hmm. That's just the way it works out there.
And you don't have nothing to defend yourself.
The Sinaloa, even though El Chapo's in there, CJ&G has stepped up big. And El Mencho now is the big name out there in Guadalajara. So a lot of corruption, a lot of problems. And it's just cocaine, it's heroin, the pills, the fentanyls, everything is coming in here, everything. And any way you think of it. A lot different with the Colombian days with the Mexicans. And I've written books about that too. So I think it'd be interesting reads too. If you don't know much about El Chapo, El Mencho, the rise of a narco empire, CJ&G, I think would be a good read.
Yeah. Well, I think we can end this on a positive note. What was, the most, because I know, we don't want to leave the viewers with thinking the cops are all corrupt or whatever, but
yeah, that's unfortunately, like I said, the 1%ers, talk about the 1% of the biker world. We got the 1%ers in the law enforcement world, which are not. Yeah.
Well, can I ask a couple of questions?
Yeah, go ahead, man.
I was looking forward to this interview. I got a question for Gary and Ignacio.
Go ahead,
Gary, did you when you were doing intel in Las Vegas, did you ever deal with Frank Collada or any of those guys when they flipped?
Yeah, no, he flipped. See, Frank Collada, we were working on the skim more from the level of the bosses in Chicago, New York, and Cleveland and Kansas, not New York, Chicago, Kansas City, and Milwaukee, and especially our bosses here, because they really we had a wire up on them and some microphones, and they were talking directly to their mole in the Tropicana, and he was reporting on what Lefty Rosenthal was doing at the Stardust and Tony Spilatro. And so they were talking about that. And so we were working on it from that end. And so the actual, like Frank Collada, he didn't know anything about the skim. He just knew it was going on. He was running the burglary crew. As a matter of fact, I called him. He was still in witness protection and really laying low when I started my moving. I got his agent, Dennis Arnoldi, maintain a relationship with him, and so through him I got Collada to call me, and I asked him about the skim. He said, yeah, and I said, Tony pretty much told us, well, stay away from that. You don't need to ask any questions about that. So we just worked on that. We didn't work with that. What we worked on was mainly off of wires. We really weren't working with any informants until the cases started coming down. They started turning people, and that's when the Bureau handled all that.
Okay. And Ignacio, my aunt lived down the block from the Iceman, Richard Kuklinski. And have you ever met Agent Polifrone? Because I know he's like a legend in the ATF. I recently connected with him on Facebook. I mean, did he ever teach like a seminar or?
What's his last name?
Dominic Polifrone.
Polifrone from Florida?
No, from New York. He had a guy in New York. His name was Richard Kuklinski. Basically, they call him a serial killer. He killed a bunch of people, and he was selling guns. And the way they got him was this ATF agent gained his trust that he was going to do a hit, and this guy Kuklinski used to kill people with cyanide. So he bought a gun from him, and then he was trying to get cyanide from him on a fake hit to get him on that. And Kuklinski was famous for, he killed a couple of people and then kept them in a freezer.
Oh, wow.
And then what he would do is he'd keep them in a freezer for a year or two, and then he would dump the body somewhere else. Yeah. So if someone went missing, And now they turned up to get it off of him, but he got a little too smart for himself because one of the hits that he did, the body didn't thaw out in time. So while the medical examiner's office is doing an autopsy, like, wait a minute, why does this person have ice crystals inside them? So they figured out that someone was refrigerating these bodies to slow down decomposition. But the guy that cracked that case was an ATF agent.
Oh, wow. Sounds like this guy was like a Dahmer, huh? Did he eat the corpses too?
No, he took credit for a lot of shit. So then HBO got a hold of him, and then he started telling bullshit stories, you know. And then like his death count went all the way up, and then they finally figured out he killed a handful of people, which is bad enough, but he was not, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Not Dahmer type. No, I didn't know him. I guess was that in the 80s or 90s?
I think the arrest was in the mid 80s.
Oh yeah, before my time. Yeah.
I just figured they might have brought him out from time to time as like a guest because he did a lot of undercover work.
Yeah, no, I wish. I'll look him up though. What's his last name? How do you spell it?
Polifrone. Just look up Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman, and then his story will
I'll definitely look him up for sure.
I smell a book coming.
Yeah.
I smell a book coming here. Ignacio, it's a good story. That Kuklinski, that's a pretty good story because he's such a crazy character in connected to the mob and serial killer and ATF. And I didn't really realize about the ATF.
Yeah, I know that. That's awesome. Oh, that's great. Hey, look, you learn a lot from doing these shows and networking, meeting people.
Yeah, no shit. What the question I was going to ask you guys too. What is the, to end it on a positive note? What is the most fulfilling work that you got out of being a police officer, or most rewarding? You can start with Gary.
I had a lot of fun, dude. I mean, we say they pay us to do this, man.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm sorry, I don't have any greater kind of good than I just had a lot of fun. For me, I was like a kid playing cops and robbers with real guns and real robbers. That's what it was to me. Because to me, when you wade through all that stuff and over 25 years, and I had to maintain my sanity. It was not personal. It was a fun game, and I played it to win, and that's what I got out of it, was a lot of great stories. And a lot of good friends.
What about you, Vic?
I mean, very similar to Gary. I couldn't believe they were paying me to do it. I always wanted to become a New York City police detective. I was able to accomplish that, and that career has enabled me to live vicariously through myself, writing books. I miss the camaraderie. I miss the adrenaline, but it was a wild ride. I'm glad I had the opportunity to do it. I've had a great life. It opened a lot of doors for me, and now I get to meet people like yourselves and talk to guys doing cases that I never did when I was active. So, I'm grateful for my career in law enforcement.
What about you, Ignacio?
No, for sure. I agree with ditto what Vic said and what Gary said. But I'll give you one story here. And it was a case, it was out of Hollywood, and it was one of my last big undercover deals before I went to headquarters and I promoted. And it was about 2.5-year investigation. I'm dealing with this Cuban guy, and he sold me a lot of drugs, a lot of guns. We're networking. He was the biggest drug dealer in Hollywood. And Hollywood PD had been trying for years to get him, but they never had the right people. He was smart enough. But like I said, informants are everything, right? I had the right informant. He vouched for me. I went in. He took me in. I spoke Spanish with him. He came from a certain part of Cuba, which I recognized because I had family from Camagüey, Cuba. I could talk to him about different things. We related, and all of a sudden he wanted me to be his big guy, and it would be a heroin connection. He's trying to introduce me to a lot of things and working out. Long story short, we took him down, and after about 2.5 years, had a search warrant, popped him and everything else. But he was a prolific drug. I mean, he had a lot of activity, over 7-8 years in this neighborhood, which was a nice area, very nice area. And we had him arrested, handcuffed him, put him in the car. I introduced myself who I was, and this is going on. He put his head down, and he was done. He had to cooperate. And then we had the drugs, and we still had a lot of drugs in the house and guns. I probably purchased over 30 some odd weapons from him, from other contacts he had. It was a good case. And then the neighbors, little by little, start coming out and thanking us and say, this guy has been a menace here for so long, selling drugs to our kids. I just personally want to thank you for finally arresting him, doing something about it. So, we had like 3 or 4 of them come up to us and do that. That was nice and touching to feel like we're making a difference in this community, making it better for them. And that's what's gratifying about the work we do, is making a difference in people's lives. And at the end, that was a nice touch.
Yeah, no, I mean, it does sound like you guys really enjoyed your careers as, working for law enforcement, because I'm sure it's something you guys wanted to do as kids. I mean, you just kind of fall into stuff and, turned out to be the best thing you ever did in your life, so I'm glad you guys
we made it. We made it, right? Not everybody just makes it. It turned out well for us, but it doesn't turn out well for some people.
That's true.
That's something.
I have young guys come to me over the years. I've had young guys come to me and talk about wanting to be cops. I said, I want to tell you, first thing, I said, this isn't a job you take just to have a job, just a government job. This is not that job. If you think this is just a job, then forget about it. You ain't going to last, and you're probably going to have trouble. You got to want to do this really bad and really enjoy doing it and be able to play politics and play the game of being on the streets and not get too caught up in it. So that's, it's just not for everybody.
Yeah, that's true, because, I mean, you just never really, I mean, you watch the shows and stuff, but I mean, everybody that's a cop wants to be a cop, is what it seems like. I mean, if someone's just, taking the job to take a job, I mean, that's, to be a cop, like just for, just to have a job. I mean,
people get washed out too. There are people that don't make it. It's not for them. And that's okay too. After a few years, it's not for them. It's not for them. And it happens. And it happens a lot. It's the stress, the pressure. It's not a 9-to-5 job.
No.
I talk about my book. It's not a 9-to-5 job. I worked crazy hours. You miss a lot of family events because of the job, call outs, your duty. Especially, I'm working undercover. I always have my phone where I can record conversations, right? So I'm making calls. You guys test me. I mean, they're going to call me on Sunday at 10 o'clock at night to see if I pick up. And of course I'm going to have to pick up. And I'm going to have to talk to this guy for about an hour on a Sunday night. And you say, oh, no way this guy can be a Fed working off. He's taking my call. Right. I'm good. So you have to do all those things if you're going to be successful.
Yeah.
You have to do it. And it's not a normal life. And it's nice. I feel the stress is different. I don't have the stress anymore that I had, which is nice. I'm now a writer. I get to talk in shows. I feel like it's been lifted off my shoulders. And I really enjoy doing this with you guys and doing the shows. And people ask me if I would do my own podcast or, I enjoy the writing. And I've told you I'm only doing the screenplays. They're done based on my book, ATF Undercover, for a TV pilot. We'll see. I'm hoping that works out well. We're in the works on doing that too. So I'll let you guys know how that turns out.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, cool. Man.
Yeah, man. So.
Do you guys have any questions to throw at each other or anything else? I know Vic had a few, but I don't know if there's anything else you guys want to touch on.
Oh, Jesus, I don't know. Okay. My mind's, I'm like.
I'll say something funny. So on Gary's show and on Adrian's show, you guys, I don't know how it unlocked, but one of you guys asked me about Tommy Uva.
Oh yeah. I made it into a short.
To know about this guy. It's like I can't believe 40 years later I'm talking about some kid from my neighborhood. It's just, I thank the both of you for that.
Yeah, I remember you were talking about him on my show too.
Who is he?
Rob the Mob, dude.
Rob the Mob.
You remember Rob the Mob movie about the boy and the man and the woman that went around robbing the social clubs in New York City?
You know what was funny? That day I did that interview with you, Vic, I watched that movie that same day.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, holy shit, I know exactly what you're talking about. But if I didn't watch that movie that day, I never knew who that guy was.
Yeah, it's nothing. I got through about 5 minutes of it and I'm saying, no. It's not even close to that kid's lifestyle. Trust me. I got a large cup of coffee of him in the
80s. Yeah. No, I mean, you were there, so you're going to definitely know more than what these movie producers and shit are going to know. But, I appreciate you guys taking out an hour of your time, talking with me and, giving your guys a perspective on working in law enforcement. I think, this was a really good segment that we did. We could always definitely do more. And
for sure.
I think, you guys, we hear a lot from the ex-gangsters, the guys, the mafia guys, but you guys got a hell of a story too. You guys were around a lot of crazy shit, so I think it's only right to do shows with you guys. And I mean, I'm sure, I don't know, maybe you guys know Giovanni Rocco. I recently dropped an interview with him. He infiltrated the New Jersey Mafia, the DeCavalcante family.
Yeah.
But guys like that, I mean, interviews with them, I mean, it's just so interesting, I mean, I really enjoy them. So I really, have respect for the law enforcement side of it too. So, thank you guys again for coming on.
Well, thank you, Aiden, for having us.
Well, what everyone think? I thought this would be a very interesting segment. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview. Please share it with anyone that you think will enjoy it. Also, I'll put Gary's podcast link in the video description. Also, I'll put 2 separate links for Ignacio and Vic's books in the video description. Please check them out. They got a lot of great books. Also, if you want to support me and my clothing brand, I got t-shirts, hoodies, beanies, and sweats all on my website. I'll be sure to put that in the video description below as well. At the end of this video, you'll see my Mafia playlist of all my other Mafia interviews I've done in the past. I've done interviews with Mafia associates, made men, capos, and all kinds of different people. And on the other side of it, law enforcement that helped take down the Mafia. I've also interviewed a lot of Mafia historians that have written books about the Mafia. Please check it out if that interests you. The last thing that I'll bring up is my Mafia documentary series I've been working on. There's 11 episodes altogether, and it's about 11 different Mafia crime families. Please check out this trailer for my documentary series, and if you like it, please hit subscribe. Thanks again for watching. This life is very twisted. You never know when it's your time to go. One day you're putting in work with someone, and the next day they're taking you out.
In our days, it was very quiet, nobody ever talked about this, nobody glamorized it. It was all like hush hush.
Not a glamorous life. And again, it's not what you see in Goodfellas. It's not what you see in Casino. Some days you were dead broke. Some days you had $2,000 in your pocket. It wasn't every day. You don't know anything else. You don't know what it is to go wake up 6 o'clock and go to work. Work? What the fuck is that? I wasn't going to work.
Even bosses get murdered in this life.
There was younger guys underneath him, and he wasn't doing the right thing, I guess. He was coming out of the card game, and unfortunately, a lone gunman came up and shot him 5 times.
People who knew me would tell you, I like to use the bat a lot. If I had to shoot you, I'd shoot you too. I've done that.
This life requires many mixed personalities. You have to wear many hats in this life to try and survive.
You become 4 or 5 different people all at once. And you got to go home and be a dad and a husband. You got to go to work and do your job. You got to be out in the street and be a gangster.
Bonanno family is called Bonanno family because of my grandfather, Joe Bonanno.
That life there is done. Today you have to be legitimate today.
But you got to be an idiot to want to be a hooligan today. Jail time's now like 100 years for doing nothing.
Yeah, you'll be dead, in prison for life, or in the witness protection program.
I don't know anybody. Now, when the Mafia turned their back on me, I know everybody.
There was the big flip of the Gambino underboss, Sammy the Bull Gravano.
Here he is, signing autographs in a restaurant on Mulberry Street. And was supposed to be a secret organization.
He was a very, very, very violent guy. No question about it.
Albert Anastasia, he was a Brooklyn guy. He was probably the biggest killer in the history of the mob.
Michael Francis, his father, Sonny, was a really tough guy. But he really raised his son right.
If you want to see a gangster, that's Sonny Francis. And John Sr. don't compliment anybody.
This is a documentary series about the American Mafia. It includes 11 different crime families. Each episode is about a different one. The crime families include the Gambino, Genovese, Bonanno, Colombo, Lucchese, the Gallo Crew, Chicago Outfit, the Philadelphia Mafia, the Patriarca, the Trafficante crime family, and the Jewish Mafia. Please subscribe to my channel to watch each episode as they come out.